You ever notice how payday barely feels different anymore? The money hits your account, and somehow you still feel nervous. You buy one thing to relax: food, shoes, a little reward. Then immediately check your bank app again. Most people aren't drowning because they're irresponsible. They're drowning because modern life quietly trains emotional spending, and almost nobody notices it happening. Look, financial freedom usually doesn't disappear in one big mistake. It leaks out through tiny unconscious behaviors. Someone gets a raise. 3 months later, they're somehow more stressed. That sounds impossible until you understand lifestyle inflation. The scary part: your brain adapts to comfort ridiculously fast. What once felt luxurious becomes emotionally normal. A new apartment becomes baseline. A nicer car becomes expected. Convenience slowly becomes necessity. And this creates a problem nobody talks about. Your income grows, but your freedom doesn't. Most people think wealth is about earnings, but freedom is actually about the gap between ego and expenses. That's the hidden equation. According to the Federal Reserve, a huge percentage of Americans couldn't handle a sudden emergency expense comfortably, even many high earners, which means this isn't just a money issue, it's behavioral, psychological. You can make 6 figures and still feel trapped, because stress isn't always caused by low income. Sometimes it's caused by invisible obligations, car payment, subscriptions, financed identity. Here's the weird thing. People often buy things to temporarily escape financial anxiety, which creates more financial anxiety. That's why emotional spending feels addictive. Your brain gets relief first, consequences later. Dopamine is expensive. Nobody says that enough. Modern life monetizes your emotions constantly. Bad day, order food, feeling insecure, buy something, feeling left behind, upgrade your lifestyle online. Make it look like you're doing okay. Social media made financial comparison permanent. You no longer compare occasionally. You compare every single day. Someone younger buys a house, someone travels more, someone posts their morning routine in a luxury apartment, and even if you pretend it doesn't affect you, your brain still absorbs it, quietly. Most purchases are emotional negotiations with identity, not logical calculations. That's the uncomfortable truth. People don't just buy shoes, they buy confidence, belonging, status, escape. A luxury watch says something emotionally, so does a financed car, so does eating at expensive places constantly. And honestly, companies understand this psychology better than consumers do. That's why advertising feels emotional now. Nobody sells products anymore. They sell identities, versions of yourself. The dangerous part isn't the spending itself, it's the repetition. Small repeated behaviors become entire futures. A daily $20 habit feels harmless. But over a year, that's thousands disappearing silently, invested over decades. The number becomes genuinely shocking. That's where compounding changes the conversation. Money compounds, but habits compound faster, both good and bad ones. Most people understand compound interest mathematically. Very few understand it behaviorally. That's why change feels invisible at first. Investing feels boring early on, because growth starts slowly, almost painfully slowly, which is why people quit too early. Humans struggle to stay motivated without immediate rewards. Our brains weren't built for delayed gratification. Saving money can feel emotionally unrewarding. You sacrifice now for a future version of yourself you barely feel connected to. That's a real psychological phenomenon, by the way. Studies show people literally struggle to emotionally identify with their future selves. So future consequences feel abstract, which explains a lot. Debt feels immediate. Retirement feels imaginary. That's why people say things like, "I'll start investing later." Then suddenly 10 years disappear. And this is where things quietly spiral, because time matters more than people realize, especially with investing. Someone who invests early often contributes less money overall, yet still ends up wealthier because time did most of the work. Investing late is like planting a tree during a storm. Possible? Yes, but much harder. Meanwhile, inflation keeps moving silently in the background. Like a leaking bucket, nobody notices. Your money slowly loses power over time. Prices rise gradually enough to normalize. That's why inflation feels psychologically sneaky. You adapt before you react. Groceries cost more. Rent climbs higher. But your brain adjusts slowly instead of panicking instantly. And honestly, that adaptation is dangerous financially because normalized pressure becomes permanent pressure. Most people don't feel financially trapped overnight. It happens through slow accumulation, tiny monthly decisions stacking together. Subscriptions are a perfect example. $10 here, $15 there. Silent financial erosion. One study found many people underestimate their monthly subscriptions significantly because invisible spending doesn't feel emotionally real until the total appears. Financial freedom is often lost through convenience. Delivery fees, impulse upgrades, automatic renewals. Modern systems are designed to remove friction from spending. One click, one tap, no pause between emotion and purchase. But the people who eventually build freedom usually do one thing differently. They create friction before emotional decisions. And that tiny pause changes everything. One friend buys things immediately, the other waits 24 hours. 5 years later, their lives barely resemble each other. That sounds dramatic, but repeated emotional interruptions change financial outcomes massively. Tiny pauses create entirely different futures because most bad financial decisions aren't calculated. They're reactive, stress-driven, emotion-driven. Someone argues with their partner, then suddenly they're online shopping at midnight. Not because they need something, but because they need relief. Retail therapy works temporarily. That's why it's dangerous. Your brain remembers the comfort before the consequences. And companies know this. Why do you think shopping apps send notifications late at night? That timing isn't random. Exhausted people make worse decisions. Financial stress lowers long-term thinking. There's actual research behind that. One study found scarcity can reduce cognitive bandwidth significantly. Basically, stress consumes mental energy, which makes planning harder. So people blame themselves for being bad with money, when sometimes their nervous system is operating in survival mode. That changes the entire conversation. Now, that doesn't remove responsibility, but it explains the pattern. And understanding patterns is powerful because once you see the loop, you stop treating symptoms. You start redesigning behavior. Here's a simple example. A lot of people track expenses numerically. Very few track them emotionally. But emotion is usually the trigger. Loneliness spending, boredom spending, stress spending. Imagine writing this beside every purchase. How was I feeling right before this? That question alone changes awareness. Financial freedom starts psychologically before it starts mathematically. That's the part most people skip, and it costs them years. There's another uncomfortable truth, too. Some people stay broke protecting an identity, not building a future. The expensive car, designer clothes, constant upgrades. Sometimes status is just insecurity with monthly payments attached. And deep down, people know it. They just don't say it out loud. A guy earning good money finances everything. Luxury apartment, luxury image. But privately, he's anxious constantly because appearances are expensive to maintain. Meanwhile, someone quieter lives below their means, invests automatically, builds slowly. Online, the second person looks less successful. In reality, they're buying freedom. That's the irony. Wealth often looks boring in real life. Consistency isn't visually impressive, but financially, it's lethal. Most millionaires don't look like social media millionaires. That's been shown repeatedly in wealth studies, because real wealth prioritizes ownership over appearance. Ownership changes psychology. Debt feels like carrying weight uphill. Assets feel like planting roots. And the earlier you start planting, the less force you need later. Time becomes your ally. People underestimate how powerful automation is, not because it's exciting, but because it removes emotion from decisions. Automatic investing is behavioral protection. It protects you from yourself, from fear, from hesitation. Because humans are inconsistent emotionally, systems aren't. That distinction matters more than motivation. Motivation disappears fast, especially after long work days, especially during hard seasons. Systems continue quietly in the background. That's why financially free people often obsess over routines, not inspiration. The drifter waits to feel ready. The architect builds structure first, even imperfect structure. One person reacts constantly, the other designs intentionally. That difference compounds for decades. And honestly, most people are closer to stability than they think. They're just leaking energy everywhere. Random subscriptions, impulse upgrades, emotional purchases disguised as deserving it. Deserving joy matters, but confusing comfort with freedom creates problems later. That distinction is huge because freedom is different from pleasure. Pleasure is immediate. Freedom is long-term breathing room. Freedom is waking up without panic, without checking your bank account nervously before breakfast, without feeling trapped at work. That's why financial freedom feels emotional. It's not really about yachts. It's about reduced fear. And this next part kind of shocked me when I understood it. A lot of people don't actually want wealth. They want relief. Relief from stress, relief from uncertainty, relief from constantly starting over, which means the real goal changes, not looking rich, becoming hard to financially destabilize. That mindset changes everything. You stop asking, what looks successful? And start asking, what creates peace 5 years from now? That's a completely different life. Maybe you feel behind. Maybe you avoided investing for years. Maybe debt already feels heavy. And honestly, I get it. Most people were never taught how money affects behavior, only how to spend it. But awareness changes trajectories surprisingly fast. One new system, one changed habit, one intentional pause. Your future is rarely destroyed by one decision. It's shaped quietly by repeated patterns, daily, weekly, monthly. So before you buy something next time, pause for a second. Ask yourself what emotion is really making the decision, because financial freedom usually begins the moment you stop living unconsciously and start realizing your small, invisible behaviors are building your future in real time. If this changed how you see money, subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and watch the next video before the pattern resets again.